Hi, this is Ms. Bastido. I'm here to talk about Unit 3, Topic 2, specifically population ecology. It's a quite short topic, so we won't spend too much time on it. It should be a pretty short video. So our main concepts that we're going to talk about here are carrying capacity, limiting factors. You should be able to calculate population growth by the end of this. You should also be able to use the Lincoln Index, and then being able to determine growth models using exponential and logistic growth models. So populations will grow really exponentially if there's unlimited resources. So we know that that's really very rarely true. It is occasionally true, at least for a short amount of time. And so we will talk about that population growth model, what that looks like when resources are unlimited and populations are growing and growing and growing. When we are calculating growth rate, we have to take into consideration birth rate, death rate, and then we also have to consider immigration and emigration. And so immigration being those that are coming into the population, and emigration being those that are exiting the population. Not necessarily by birth or death, but by moving from one population to another. So the equation for that is that the growth rate is equal to births plus the immigration, and then subtract deaths plus emigration. So you should be able to use that equation to determine the growth rate of a population. And so we have two models of population growth. The first one's exponential. In exponential, we have no migration. So we're assuming that no one is migrating. We're assuming that all resources are unlimited. We're also making other assumptions in this model, which is that there must not be any predators or disease or anything controlling the population growth. And so the growth is linear, and it is exponential growth. We'll sometimes see this graph maybe isn't the best, but you'll see in the next graph where it kind of slowly goes up. It looks like a J-shaped curve, probably be more accurate than this picture here. In logistic growth, which is a population grows and then it levels off. Again, that's probably not the best graph, but we'll have another one in a minute. And this would be more of an S-shaped curve. Something is limiting the population growth. Usually multiple things are limiting the population growth. So we're going to dive a little deeper into those two models. So if you're looking here, you can see that this is a population of houseflies, probably in my house, to be honest. And the population is quite small. And then as the year progresses, they are doubling in number. So by exponential growth, that means they keep doubling in number every generation. And so the numbers keep doubling. So at first the growth seems to be slow, but that's because the numbers are low. And so you go from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. And then once you get to those larger numbers, it really starts to take up, go a bit faster, and you'll see this huge J-shaped curve. So that's how we know it's exponential growth. We'll see a J-shaped curve. Again, this only is going to happen if there's unlimited resources. The rate of growth is getting faster and faster as the population gets bigger. There's no predators, no shortage of food here. There wouldn't be any disease. And usually this can't happen for very long. Obviously, there's going to be some limiting factor that will limit the size of the population. Occasionally we'll see, I've written here, occasionally you'll see where recovery populations, so a population, you could take wolves in Yellowstone, for example, when they reintroduced them into Yellowstone, they had gone extinct. When they reintroduced them, initially the population would have grown this way. And so, because it's a recovering population. But eventually it would level off. And so we'll see populations where we're doing reintroduction of species that we might see them grow exponentially initially. Logistic growth looks a bit different. So here you can see these are the number of seals by year. And so they start to increase very quickly. And then something happens and they start to level off. This is due to, it could be due to a predator. It could be due to limited food source. Could be limited space, limited mates, that sort of thing. Any of those limiting factors can cause the population to sort of level off, you could say. And we'll say that this is some kind of environmental resistance that causes them to level off. And that resistance can be any of these limiting factors that we've discussed. And so we would call this an S-shaped curve or a logistic curve. So this carrying capacity that we are talking about, usually a population is going to grow exponentially, and then it will kind of overshoot the carrying capacity. So the carrying capacity, by definition, is just the number of organisms that the environment can support. And so this will vary by the environment, and it will also vary by the species. So the carrying capacity for each species, for each population, would actually be different. And so typically exponential growth occurs initially, and then there's probably an overshoot to the carrying capacity, which causes a dieback, and the population dies back, usually recovering, and then it kind of stabilizes. Obviously, the numbers won't stay exactly at carrying capacity, and so it will just kind of fluctuate. As you can see here, it fluctuates around the carrying capacity unless something catastrophic happens, or an invasive species is introduced or something like that. Usually, if I have a limited resource, for instance, if there was a drought, the carrying capacity could actually move. And so if there was a drought, maybe the carrying capacity for certain species would be lower during that drought. So the limited resource can, if there's a drought and I'm a herbivore and there's not as much plants to eat because of the drought, then my carrying capacity would be, the carrying capacity of that population would be lower in that time period. And so that this carrying capacity that we're talking about can vary depending on conditions in the environment. So what are some of these limiting factors? Most of these you probably already know. I'll move myself over here. We say that we can put them into two categories. So they're either density dependent, meaning that the limited resource is, it matters how many are in the population per unit area. And so disease would be density dependent. Obviously, disease spreads quicker when there are more organisms in an area, or more in the population. And so competition, there's more competition when there's more organisms in the area. Predators are more of a factor if there's more of you, because you're more likely to be caught. Parasites, which kind of goes into disease. Food, water. Water is the only one here that is technically abiotic. All the other ones are biotic factors. And so you can usually think of density dependent factors as biotic. Availability of water would not be biotic, but the rest of them are. And so the greater the population, the greater the effect these have on the population and become more of a limiting factor. Density independent factors have nothing to do with the size of the population, and that they affect the population no matter what the size. And so if you had a volcanic eruption, a really high temperature, a really hot summer, storms such as cyclones, floods, drought, you could say rainfall. Rainfall then affects water availability, but rainfall could also be here, because we could talk about if there's a lack of rainfall, we then go into a drought, then the plants don't grow, and that could affect the population of herbivores. Pesticides or any kind of chemicals that are in the environment, and then bushfires. All of these are abiotic factors. They're all density independent factors, meaning that the size of the population really doesn't affect their influence. And so they can be a limiting factor at any time to any size of any population. So one way that we can estimate the size of a population. So if I'm in the field on my farm and I wanted to know how many mice are running around my farm, I could do a mark recapture. And so this is called the Lincoln Index, and we estimate the population size by saying the number that I captured the first time times the number I captured the second time divided by the number in the second capture that had a mark on them. So what we would do is, here's my N1. So if I counted these mice, we'd say there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in my first capture, I captured 7 mice. Then I captured them and marked them. The marking is important. You wouldn't want to mark them to make them more susceptible to a predator, or weigh them down so they can't move around. So you have to think about what kind of marks you do, what kind of marking you do based on the species. This could be a tag, it could be a lot of different things. When I was in uni, I helped with an organization to mark recapture, or really I just did the marking, not really the recapture, but the marking of butterflies. And then if they were ever captured again, then they were trying to calculate, they were doing two things. They're trying to calculate the population size, but also trying to figure out their migratory patterns of the monarch butterflies. So in this one, so I've captured 7 in the first, then I release them back out. I come back later. Later could be the next day. It really depends on the species. It could be the next month. It could be a week later. And you would do a second capture. In that second capture, I would count how many I captured. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I captured 7. And so I would put for my N1, 7, and my N2, 7. And then I would divide it by the number that had a mark on them in the recapture. So these 2 had been captured. They had some sort of mark on them, and they were recaptured. So I have 2. So it would be 7 times 7, which is 14. And I divide it by a number that were recaptured, which was 2. And so then I would estimate the size of this population to be 7. Now, if you look at the actual size of this population, that's not really that accurate. But it is the best we can do with without having to estimate that, like actually go and count each individual in the population, which isn't really reasonable. So here's another example. Some fish here. So here's day 1, catch some fish, count them, and tag them. So you go fishing, you get 5 fish, you tag them, and you release them back. Come back another day. This one they count N2, they counted 4 fish. So we would say 5, which was N1, times 4, which was N2, the number I captured on the second day, and then divide those by the number that you caught on the second day that also had a mark on them, which was 1. So 5 times 4, which is 20, divided by 1. Our population estimate here is 20. If I count the total population, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I got exactly 20. So this is very unusual that you would get the exact number, but obviously this is just a small, an example that's probably not very realistic. But your population estimate depends on how many mark recaptures you do. So ideally you would have done this multiple times, so then you'd really get a better estimate, not just doing it once. This should then tell you the estimated size of a population. We want to use this. So we've talked about estimating population size using quadrats and things like that, but we can't really estimate the size of a population using a quadrat if the species moves. So for animals, quadrat sampling is not usually very reasonable, and so that's when we would use the mark recapture. And that is all you have to know about populations. Hopefully that was helpful to you. This is my new dog, Omar. And if you have any questions, just let me know.